We've all been there. When a difficult conversation arises in our music studio because a boundary was crossed or a rule was forgotten or, just something icky happened. And it can be really frustrating to have those conversations. They put us into this space of not feeling good about being a business owner and, maybe feeling like we need to blame somebody for the things that are going wrong. And so today, what I want to talk about is how we can improve our client communication by stopping the blame game. This is inspired by a couple of different books that I've read over the years, and it's a conversation that I'm really passionate about. So I hope that you enjoy these tips today. We are going to be going through three, actually five, because I have some bonus tips for you all. Some 5 tips for you to have better conversations with your clients, to improve the way that you deal with difficult issues. And these things are super easy to implement. So I'm very excited to share these tips with you. If you are joining me live, please be sure to tell me where you're coming from. If you're joining later on in the rerun, hey, jump into the conversation because this never goes stale. I will be back to have that conversation with you, so you can just pretend that you're with us live right now. All right, so today we are going to be talking about how to improve communication by stopping the blame game. Now, let's dig into this in a moment, but before we do that, I want to do some quick housekeeping to let you all know that we've got all kinds of things planned for you today. And hey, if you're new here, my name is Sara Campbell. I'm a business, marketing, and mindset coach for music studio owners and online education experts just like yourself. And you can find me here live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So welcome to the broadcast, everyone. Hey there, Leishan. Nice to see you, my good friend. So good to see you. If you have a teacher friend who could benefit from this conversation, please let them know about it. We do this every single week, and it's a free space for us to learn out loud together. And so the more the merrier. If you have a teacher friend, invite them to join us here. Or if you're part of a teacher group that could benefit from these tips, please let them know about it. Now, we have the Savvy Sara bot set up. So if you give us a hashtag takeaway, then that's going to allow her to send you some really cool stuff for today. So she's going to be sending you a recap of the points that we're going over and some details on the bonus tips that we're going to be talking about today. And she's also going to send you some links to a book that I think would be really valuable for you to consider, especially since a lot of what we do, right, is going to give you a lot of what we do as professionals. It's all about having those difficult conversations. So give me a hashtag takeaway with the things that you want to learn. And the Savvy Sara bot is set up with the word convo today. So if you want to get a hold of those free things that I just mentioned, you'll put a convo below and she will get you all of the goods. All right, let's get to it. All right, we are talking about how to improve conversations by stopping the blame game. So let's detail this a little bit. What do I mean by the blame game? Well, when boundaries are crossed, it can feel really easy to step into a reactionary stance and to become a little bit defensive by pointing fingers at wrongdoers. So that might be, somebody who didn't abide by a policy that you have, someone who didn't read the emails that you've sent out. And it can be simple to find ourselves in that space where we're frustrated and we jump into what I call the blame game when something goes wrong. But here's the problem. Blame doesn't fix the situation. It actually just adds fuel to the fire. So what we're going to be going over today are tips that will allow you to shift away from what we call the blame game and get into productive conversations, even if they are difficult to have. So we're going to stop that cycle of resentment and anger and assumptions, and we're going to get serious about considering the following questions. Let's get to it today. Oh, I see we've got some people tuning in there. I will say good morning. Oops. I will say good morning to Karen and Leishan and Laura and Deidre Smith. Nice to see you all today. I gave you guys a little sneak peek of my script behind the screen. But let's get to the tips, shall we? All right, tip number 1 today is to consider the difference between reacting and responding. So, when we are faced with a difficult conversation, whether it's, and this could, when I say conversations, I'm talking about all different types of conversations. So often these conversations are initiated via text or via email or, even like a Facebook message or something like that. And it could be a phone conversation or a conversation in real life in person. But what we have to do first when we're having these difficult conversations is we have to realize that there's a very big difference between reacting and responding. So when we're initially faced with something that gets our hackles up, right, that puts that pit in the bottom of your stomach and gets you all knotted up, our first reaction is to react. And when we're reacting, we are often doing so from a place of emotion. And what we say when we're in a reactionary stance is going to be quite different than if we are in a responsive stance. So we need to, step number 1, give yourself some space. So if you've got that angry email or an angry text, or even if it's not an angry thing, it's just something that kind of like pushes your buttons and has you feeling like, I'm not feeling good about this. I want you to give yourself some space and allow yourself to ask the question, if I respond right now, am I reacting with emotion, or am I giving myself a little bit of space, time to consider what I want to say, and then going into a response that's more measured and even? Now, oh, hey there, Elizabeth, nice to see you. Thanks for joining. The best way to shift from reaction to response is that space in between the conversation. So if you've got an email that's got you going, or a text message that's like frustrating you, I want you to remember the 24-hour rule. If it's something that you are like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a hard conversation, and you immediately jump into typing up that text or typing up that email, and you're coming from that very emotional place, you are likely going to add fuel to the fire rather than figuring out a solution that allows both parties to feel good. So if you're having that difficult conversation and you're faced with it, give yourself a 24 hours to respond. I know that that's going to feel weird at first. It will. It will feel weird at first because most of us, like our modus operandi is to deal with the problem immediately because we see that problem and we're like, oh, I need to fix this. But if it's a really difficult conversation to have, then we need to give it a little time and space. And I'm going to tell you what you can do in that time and space so that you don't feel like you're just hitting the pause button and, pushing a problem down the road. Thank you, Laura. She says, this is excellent advice. I learned this while teaching school and dealing with parents and administrators. Take time to think. Exactly. Because when we take that time, we can move from the reacting to the responding. So let's look at what we're going to do in that time. Step number 2. And if you guys are, if you find something that's valuable, don't forget to give those takeaways here. Step number 2 is to understand the stories. So let's talk about what I mean by stories. I was reading a book a couple of years ago, and it's called Difficult Conversations. And if you've ever read that book, say Difficult Conversations below. It's a really fabulous read. And one of the biggest takeaways for me from that book was to understand that we all have different stories. What you know is different from what the other person knows. So you have your own story. You have your own collection of facts and fictions, because some of the things that we hold on to aren't necessarily true. And that set of fact and fictions is entirely different than the other person's set. And we cannot understand that other person's story unless we allow space and ask the right questions. So, giving some examples, if you've got a parent who is paying late, or if, let's just go with that example. If you've got somebody who has forgotten to pay you, right? And you're getting kind of irritated. You've sent reminders, you've done these things, and nothing is happening. This is an example from my real life. I had this happen a couple of years ago where I had a parent who was super late in paying, and this had been a trend. And I was getting very frustrated and just thinking like, I have done everything that I could in order to remind this person and to contact this person. Well, here's the deal. I didn't understand her story. Part of her story was that my emails were landing in her spam box. So while I was relying on email to make sure that she had the information that she needed, I did not realize those emails were landing someplace that she couldn't see them. So I didn't understand her side of the story. And if I had taken more time to think about, instead of reacting and actually responding and picking up the phone and reaching out to that person and having a good conversation, I could have saved myself a lot of stress. So it's so important to understand the stories. Yes. There we go. Best reminder ever. Are we hearing and understanding each other's stories? Very good. Yes. Learning this lesson well while teaching in the classroom setting. There are at least two sides to every story, and both may be based on some misconceptions, right? Some misconceptions and some assumptions. So we need to understand that our story is different from theirs. And when we approach that difficult conversation, knowing that it is important to understand that person's view, to understand what are their facts, what are their fictions. So that's the first thing that you're going to consider after you give yourself the space to move from reaction to response, right? Here's another question that's really good to ask. I want you to ask yourself, what do you want? When you're faced with something that feels icky or a hard conversation to have, it's time to sit down and write out what you want. Get specific. What kind of results do you want to have in this conversation? What do you want to feel? What are the steps that you want to see? How do you want to be treated? What do you want? And once you start writing all of those things down, you're going to ask yourself a second question. What else do you want? Because that first answer that you have, it's probably not the full picture. So we need to be able to, in that space where we're waiting to shift out of that reactionary stance, we need to ask ourselves, what do I want? One of the ways that we phrase this question in the Speakeasy Cooperative is, what is your desired outcome? What would be the best outcome for this situation for both parties involved? So if you find yourself stuck and you're not sure what to say or what to do, sit with that question and write it out. What do you want? And then ask yourself, what else do you want? Getting clear on those answers can be so eye-opening. So if we go back to that example where the client wasn't paying on time and I was sending these email reminders, if I had sat down to see what do I want, I say, I want this parent to be able to read these emails and respond in a timely fashion. And then I would consider, okay, well, if that is what I want, maybe I should check on, is she getting the emails? And that would have shifted the conversation. So sitting with that question is super important. I see Christine has dropped a convo below. That is the magic word of the day, and you'll be able to get a hold of the broadcast details afterwards. So we've got the 3 steps so far, right? Reacting versus responding, understanding the stories that everybody has, and then asking yourself, what do you want? Here's bonus number 1, and we're going to call it number 4. You ready? Consider the yes and no scale. Okay, so what I mean by the yes and no scale is when we are coming up with a solution for that difficult conversation, when a boundary's been crossed and you're trying to figure out what to do with that, I want you to remember that when you are saying yes to something, you are saying no to something else. And you can flip it. If you are saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. So considering the yes and no scale when you're coming up with solution is really important, especially if you find yourself wanting to make an exception to some boundaries. So a good example of this would be scheduling, right? Because scheduling boundaries are something that I think a lot of independent music teachers struggle with. You'll have a client that might say, okay, I can't do this time anymore, but I can do, I'm available all day on Saturday. But then you find that you don't teach on Saturday. Well, the options here are to say, yes, I can do that thing on Saturday, but then what you're saying no to is whatever else you were going to do on Saturday or having that day off. If you say no to that ask from a client, then you are saying yes to the boundary that you've set in place. You're saying yes to being able to go to your son's soccer game. You're saying yes to being able to spend some downtime outside of your business and just be a regular human being. A human being that like has hobbies and friends and does other things other than just being a music teacher. I know it's shocking. This actually happens. I've heard about it. So, considering the yes or no scale is really important. So when you're sitting down and you're figuring out, what do you want? Consider that yes or no scale and think about what are the options here that I have. Yeah, good takeaway. The yes and no scale. You needed that today. I'm glad that resonated. The yes and no scale is something that I come back to frequently, right? It's something that I have to consider on the regular, when people ask me to do certain things or can I do this? Can I do that? And I look at my schedule or I consider the time that would be involved with that. And I think to myself, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Really good question. So before we get to the bonus tip, because I've got a good one for you, I just want to have a quick reminder for those who attended last week's broadcast. We were talking about Pinterest, and I wanted to remind everybody that on June 16th, there's a masterclass. I'm going to be going to it. I'm going to be attending it, not part of it. And if you wanted to get a hold of that, you're going to go to savvymusicstudio.com/Laura. Super easy to remember. You do have to enroll to get a hold of it. So I just wanted to invite you to that. I know that I've had several teachers who have reached out to me via PM and email to tell me that they're now doing things on Pinterest, which is super awesome. And if you wanted to learn more about Pinterest, Laura's masterclass is going to be really great. It's actually happening right after our broadcast next week. So I'm going to be jumping from this right into her masterclass and attending with you all. So I hope some of you will consider attending if Pinterest is something that you want to start using in your studio. Head on over to that link and make sure that you register. It's going to be a really great time. And for those who are like watching this later on, there is going to be a replay for this. So this is going to be an evergreen masterclass, but it's kind of cool to go live if you have the opportunity because you can ask questions. So don't forget to get a hold of that. I love this. All right. Julie, my schedule won't allow that. Hashtag my answer, right? Yes, exactly. The studio schedule cannot accommodate that. I love that answer. Yes, the recently said no to a request. The mom decided not to enroll her daughter in the other activity at that time. So what's really interesting is that when we sit down and we ask ourselves about the yes or no scale and we do the brave thing and we say no to something that might cross a boundary, more often than not, that client suddenly finds availability on another day. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that happen. But and also remembering that they're not, when they're asking something like that, just to expand on this a little bit, it's not because they want to intentionally cross your boundary. It's probably because they don't know that you don't teach on that other day. Even though I know it's probably in your policies and they could have read it, but we know that people don't read, right? We just know that. Okay. Yes, the yes or no scale, I must always remember this. It's super important. So before we get to the bonus tip, I want to do a quick recap of everything that we've talked about so far. Are we ready? When we find ourselves in difficult conversations, right? When we find ourselves in those conversations where a client is overstepping a boundary and we start to feel like a little bit upset about it and we start getting into this reactionary stance, here are 5 things that you can do to improve client communication by stopping the blame game. Because when we get into that blame game and we start pointing fingers at like, he did this, she did that, they did this, it's just not a helpful space to be in. It's just adding fuel to the fire, and we need to be able to stop that cycle so we can get out of resentment and into solutions. So here are the 5 things that you're going to do. Tip number 1, get into the reactionary stance versus responding. The best way to do this is to give yourself some space. Even if that space is like just an hour, or if it's 24 hours, whatever time period you need to cool down, take it. Because it's not going to be helpful if you come to a conversation and you're all fired up and emotional. So in that time that you're taking off, you're going to ask yourself some questions so that you can move to away from reacting to a situation and from that emotional space to responding to a situation so that you can figure out a solution. Here's what you're going to ask yourself. You're going to think about the stories that people are telling. You have your story, right? You have your set of facts and fictions and misconceptions. And the other person has another set. And more often than not, that set is quite different from yours. And we can't understand their story until we start asking good questions. So sit down and think about your stories. And here's a great tip for that. You can ask yourself a question, is this true? Is what I know true? How can I prove that it is true? And guess what? Sometimes you're going to find it's not true, just to let you know. All right, tip number 3, you're going to ask yourself, what do you want? And sit down and write it out. Think to yourself, what would the ideal outcome be in this situation? And how can I work towards that outcome? And when you're asking yourself, what do you want? And you write down that answer and you think you've got it, then I want you to ask yourself again, what else do you want? Get to the root of your desires and then think about how you can come to a solution that is going to respect your boundaries and feed your business and also give your client a good outcome as well. So the 4th thing, consider the yes and no scale. Remember that if you are saying yes to something, you are saying no to something else. And if you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. Pretty self-explanatory, but it's a great question to ask ourselves when we find ourselves in difficult conversations. Now, here's the bonus tip, and this is huge. Write that messy first draft. So if you are nervous about sending a text or an email, I want you to write it out first. And do yourself a favor, don't actually write it in text, don't actually write it in an email so that you don't accidentally send it. That messy first draft might be full of emotion. Write it somewhere where you're not going to accidentally click the send button. And here's a bonus tip on top of the bonus tip. If you're finding yourself in a really difficult conversation and that email thread is going or that text thread is going and nothing's being solved, it's time to talk to that person. Pick up the phone. Guarantee you're going to be able to get through that conversation a lot faster on the phone than via text message or email. And I know that that feels scary, but being able to have that conversation where you can hear their tone of voice, or being able to have that conversation in person where you can hear their tone of voice and see their body language, you are going to be able to better understand their story. And you are going to be able to come up with a better solution because you're going to understand where they're coming from. Yes. Karen says, I write it out and read it out loud to my husband for feedback. There you go. So with these 5 things, if you consider these 5 things, you're going to be able to have better conversations to improve that communication in your studio so that you don't have to stress about the small stuff or the big stuff. And I hope that you find these tips really helpful. If you would like to get a hold of these tips, give me a convo below. The Savvy Sara bot will reach out to you, and she's also going to be able to give you a link to that book that I mentioned called Difficult Conversations. It's a fascinating read, and I think it's been so helpful to me, not just as a business owner, but as a human being. As a human being, as a sister, as a wife, as a friend, being able to have better conversations with all of those people in your life. So I hope that you enjoy that. Don't forget that next week On June 16th, there's going to be a special masterclass on Pinterest by Laura Reich. If you want to join that with me, head on over to savvymusicstudio.com/Laura, and that's where you can register. And it's going to be a really fun time. I'm looking forward to learning more about Pinterest. So if you enjoyed today's broadcast, do me a quick favor and make sure that you hit that heart or you hit that thumbs up. And let me know that you enjoyed today's conversation. Give me your takeaways from the things that you're going to put into practice in this next week. And if you have a teacher friend who could benefit from the conversation that we had today, please invite them to join us. I would really appreciate that invitation. I can't wait to welcome them to the next broadcast. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I really appreciate you. I will see you next week on Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. My name is Sara Campbell. I'm a business strategist, mindset, and marketing coach for music studio owners and online education experts just like yourself. And I think you're a pretty dang awesome teacher. There's nobody in the world quite like you. So in the meantime, before next week, stay savvy and stay you. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.